Good afternoon, everybody. This is Steve Wilson from the U of I and the private well class. Um, this is Septic Systems 101, which is a webinar about how your septic system affects your well and best practices and answering your questions related to your septic system and how it might affect your drinking water. So I work at the Illinois State Water Survey at the University of Illinois, which is where the private well class is hosted from. It's a partnership with the Rural Community Assistance Partnership, RCAP, and the funding for this program and the work that RCAP's doing around the country with private wells is from US EPA. Thanks for joining us. And a few housekeeping things. One is if you are a sanitarian and are looking for CEUs for this, uh-oh, what did I do wrong here? Okay, push the wrong button is what I did. This is approved for credit through NEHA. We've done this, we do this webinar once a year, so we did it in July 25th and 17 and July 17th last year, same day. Basically, they have a 2-year credentialing cycle. So if your credentialing cycle just started on 7/1 and you take this today, you wouldn't be eligible to get CE credit again for it until after 6/30/21. But if your credentialing cycle starts next month, you can take it today and again next year. And it is some of the same core content, but there are some differences and updates. Especially today, we're going to talk about Septic Smart a little bit, and that program is really growing at US EPA and some of the things they provide. So there are handouts on your GoToWebinar panel that you have. There's a handout tab, and if you need those handouts, you can get to them there. We can provide a certificate of attendance, a copy of the slide deck, and then help work with completing the forms. And those you can email at info@privatewellclass.org for that information. And Katie Buckley's on the line, to help with those housekeeping issues. So this webinar is part of our overall program for the private well class. The private well class itself is a 10-lesson online class. I say online, you sign up for it and it sends you 1 lesson a week for 10 weeks, dealing from everything from septic to treatment to groundwater flow to geology and well types. So we'll talk more about that later, and we will, and our program supports what RCAP is doing around the country. They have staff in every state, and they provide boots on the ground efforts to provide both training for professionals, sanitarians specifically, or the majority of, as well as for well owners and through workshops. And they do one-on-one assistance with well owners and all over the country. So today, again, I'm Steve Wilson. I'm a groundwater hydrologist at the State Water Survey. And Jim Starbird is with us, who's a licensed sanitarian with RCAP Solutions, which is the Northeastern RCAP regional affiliate. He's with RCAP now as a technical assistance provider, but spent 7 years with a health department in Massachusetts. And he is our expert on septic system issues. And, Massachusetts is a unique state in how they deal with septic systems, and I'll show some examples of that today. They're really ahead of the game compared to a lot of states in the country. So, and Katie Buckley works with me. She's an outreach specialist here at the State Water Survey, and she'll be fielding questions. That's the other thing I should mention. We did get a lot of questions from everyone in advance, but if you have a question about anything that goes on today, there is a question tab on your GoToWebinar panel. You can ask a question there. Katie is tracking those and making a list. And at the end of the presentation, we'll throw those up on the screen and we'll do our best to answer them. So if you have anything in additional, we will go through a number of the questions that we received. We received over 100, so we probably won't be going through all of them, but we're trying to cover a lot of them are duplicates, and we'll cover a lot of that stuff today. I do want to mention RCAP. I mentioned Jim is with RCAP Solutions in Massachusetts. You can see them up in the Northeast. There are 6 RCAP affiliate nonprofits that, again, have staff in every state and can help with private well issues or work with you as a partner if you're a health department or a lab or a professional working with well owners. If you need any of that contact information, you can contact us, or you can contact them directly. Most of them, I believe all actually have a private well page on their website related to this program. And yeah, they're working, the boots on the ground folks who are like Jim, who are actually out helping well owners individually when they have issues. So it's a great group to work with. We're pretty fortunate to be a part of their team. So the water survey, for those of you in Illinois, even a lot of people in Illinois don't know about the state water survey, but we're a state scientific survey like the state geological survey or the state natural history survey. It's just that Illinois chose to develop a water survey back in the 1890s as a sister agency to our state geological survey and natural history survey. We're the only state in the country that has a water survey. We do applied research and public service and outreach. We house the state's well logs, and we also have a public service lab that does sampling for private well owners, which for inorganics and metals, which was free until 2006 when the state budget didn't allow that anymore. So I want to mention us because we have a long history. I've been here 30 plus years. Most of the work we do is with private well owners. Again, we have all the state's well logs, over 500,000 private well logs in the state that we know of. And I just throw this up as an example of the type of information we have in our files. We also provide communities with services like pump tests and other design wells, things that help communities in Illinois with their groundwater or surface water issues. And this was in the PANA file. We are digitizing some of this older material, historic records. And this is a typhoid outbreak in Pana, Illinois in 1916. And that was eventually tracked to the Pana Ice Cream Company, which you can see the arrows there. They had 2 locations, it looks like. And so it's an example of, we've been here for a long time working with issues related to drinking water quality and those things. So today we're going to talk about septic systems, and mostly, at least what I'm going to cover, and the only experience I have is with conventional septic systems. That's a tank and a drain field. And so, but they are a wastewater treatment system. Just like a community has a wastewater treatment system that's more advanced, you still have to maintain it and manage it to make sure that it's working properly. So it relies on natural degradation of bacteria that come from our bodies in the tank so that it can break down all that waste material and it can infiltrate into the natural groundwater. So the tank separates the solids and gives the bacteria time to do their job, which is breaking down that material. And then the liquids leave through the top through a pipe that goes into a drain field that's built to help remove that liquid and have it harmlessly infiltrate into the ground. So that's how it's supposed to work. And you know, there's several questions from folks today who are on the webinar about, hey, my system's over 50 years old and still working, things like that. If you maintain it properly and you take care of it, they can last that long or longer. And so it's really about understanding how it works, what's bad for it, and why you need to provide maintenance for your system to keep it there a long time. So this is, and this is a little blurry, I apologize. This is a septic tank and drain field example from Texas A&M from their extension. And this is a 2-compartment septic tank. So the house is on the left. Everything comes into the septic tank. Things that are less dense than water float on top. The heavier stuff falls to the bottom. And then there's a baffle in the middle that kind of helps separate, and that's why all the solids are on one side pretty much, which is a side when that gets so full it needs to be pumped. But the bacteria are in there, they're breaking material down, and then when it gets full, and as more comes in, the liquid flows out that outlet pipe on the right side of the tank into the absorption field or drain field, where there's perforated pipe and usually a gravel base around those pipes that allow the water to infiltrate out and then seep into the ground, where bacteria already breaking that down, and then bacteria in the soil continue that process. And so here's a single tank example. The scum's floating on top, there's clear water in the middle, and then there's an outlet pipe and the sludge falls to the bottom. On the right side are 2 different designs for an absorption field. There's a trench design and a bed design. The more surface area you provide for the water to get out, and the better you maintain your tank so solids don't clog that, the more efficiently it'll work. And I put on here there are over 25 million homes that have septic systems or on-site wastewater systems in the U.S. And we just heard a talk from US EPA last week at the National Environmental Health Association conference that fully 20 to 25%, probably closer to 25% of Americans rely on septic systems or on-site wastewater treatment systems. So it is a big deal. There are a lot of them out there. Many of them are very old, and you just need to take care of them like everything else, like your car or your well, all those things. So, and the thing is, when they fail, a lot of times you know it right away. The area around your tank or drain field, the grass will start getting greener at first. Eventually, there'll be a pool of water as it seeps to the surface, and then there might be a smell, or worst case, it could even back up into your house, especially if it's coming from in your basement. And knowing how to take care of this and being able to identify any problems you might have in advance will keep these things from happening. And I know there's a number of questions about smell, which you should not have, and things like that. So it's all about maintaining and taking care of it. What that means is that it needs to be sized properly and designed properly. Is it right for your situation? Did you buy a small home and basically double the size after you bought it? Now there's 6 people living there when it was meant for 3. Well, the septic tank was probably designed for the number of bedrooms, and Jim could talk more about that later if there's a question. And now all of a sudden you're loading that a lot heavier. It's probably a smaller tank, doesn't have as large of a leach field, and so those things can affect how well it works and how much time the bacteria have to do their job. Where's it at? Does it follow the regulations? A lot of the very old ones obviously don't. A lot of regulations have been put in place in the last 25 or 30 years. And knowing even the geology and the environment, land use and everything around you can affect how well it works. If you're in karst or if you have bedrock at the surface, you can't just stick in a septic tank. A lot of times you'll need a more advanced system in those cases, and understanding what your needs are. And fortunately, today, a number of states have rules based on some of those things, but not all do. So you run into older systems where bedrock is at 6 inches or a foot below land surface, and yet there's septic tanks that have been dug in to that, and it's fractured rock, or and so they're contaminating their aquifer. So and the last thing, and probably the most important thing for you as a well owner and a septic tank owner, septic system owner, is that you need to maintain it, and you do have to take care of it, or eventually you're going to run into one of those problems. So for sizing and design, it's important for understanding how often you need to pump the solids. They will build up, and no matter what folks say about additives and other things, depending on how much water goes through and how many solids enter that and how much time the bacteria have to break things down, your tank will eventually fill up, sometimes faster than others. And so when that happens, if you don't pump the solids out, then you're going to clog either the discharge pipe out of your tank, or it's going to go through the discharge and get into your septic field and start plugging those perforated pipe, those holes in the pipe. And once that happens, your system is no good. And in some cases, you may have plenty of land to put another distribution system drain field, but in other cases, you may be on a small lot and there really isn't room for a different one, and that can cause a real problem. It really matters depending on the water use, and and one of the problems we have is some of the old systems were actually just a straight pipe to a field tile or to a stream or to a ditch, and may not even have a tank at all. And those really cause a problem for the environment, and are much more likely to get plugged and cause a problem for you back in your tank or back in your house. As far as public health, it's against the law basically to have a straight pipe to the surface, although a lot of those still exist, and now they're illegal in most areas. We have had a lot of change in regulations over the last, especially 10 to 15 years, I'd say. Jim can probably speak to that better than I, but it's important to take care and manage your system so that you are protecting the environment and your groundwater source. And understanding groundwater flow direction. One of the examples I give in our well care class is that if you have a subdivision that's near a river and the house furthest away from the river is the highest elevation, if everyone's on a shallow well, it's likely that the guy who's furthest away at the highest elevation, water's following from your septic, is infiltrating the ground and reaching the water table, and it's following the water table, which may not be the aquifer the water's coming from for your well, but it also could be, or at least it could be a source. So knowing where your well is, your neighbor's well, the direction of flow, all those things matter in understanding what might be going on with the water from your septic system. And that goes to how deep your well is. If your well is a sand and gravel well that's 250 feet deep and there's 50 feet of clay between where the water's coming in your well at the bottom and the superficial water table, then it's likely your well will never be impacted by a septic system discharge. But if you're on an old dug well, it's already getting water from the water table, so understanding where the water's entering your well is critical to knowing what kind of risks you might have. As far as maintenance, septic systems have to be managed. As I mentioned before, they will fail eventually. And I put that in there. Jim may have some other thoughts, but if you maintain it properly and you take care of it, you pump it on a schedule, don't put things in there that don't belong, that are going to disrupt the bacteria in the tank, they can last a really long time. And there's examples from some of you and the questions you asked that are over 50 years old, and we see that. I just visited a well owner here in Illinois whose house was built in 1947, and their septic tank is still working just fine. And so it's 70 years later. Things like cat litter, grease, coffee grounds, they'll eventually help clog the system up. And so you need to follow best practices and understand that you want to minimize what you put in. You don't want to flush things in your toilet. You don't want to pour things down the drain that don't belong, that aren't natural. This is just one set of recommendations for the size of tank to have based on the number of people. Now, I know in some states like Massachusetts, they base it on bedrooms when they design a system for a home. But this is from NESE, the National Environmental Services Center. And so the size of the tank versus the number of people in the house, you can see if you know your tank size and you know the number of people, you can estimate how often it should be pumped. And you can see if it's a small tank and there's a lot of people, you could be pumping it a lot versus if it's a really large tank, it could be why you haven't seen any issues yet, even if you haven't had it pumped. I know, So this is just a guide, and there are better ways. One is to have someone measure the solids in your well or in your septic, assuming you know the information about your septic tank, how big it is, how many gallons it holds, you can access it, all those things, which in a lot of cases, we have a lot of people ask us how to find my septic tank. They don't even know where it's at, let alone do they maintain it or pump it regularly. So for your to-do list for maintaining your septic system, one is to maintain the area around your tank and drain field. A number of questions about what to grow around your well, around your septic tank and septic field, those sorts of things. It should just be grass, no trees, concrete, asphalt. If you have vehicles driving over that, it's compacting the soil. The drain field especially isn't that deep, and it could cause problems down the road. And trees, I think we're going to answer a question about that, or Jim is later, about roots, but you don't want to put roots. If you've ever had to have someone come out and we call it pigging a line, where you run a thing that cuts the roots out of either your septic or sometimes just a drain line, those roots always find a way in. And so it's best not to give them the opportunity to get into your system. Try to reduce the flow as much as you can into your tank. The bacteria need time to work, and so if there's a huge amount of flow coming through your septic tank, then you're going to be pushing things through into the drain field before it's ready. And so no sumps, whirlpools, and I said here softener backwash. There's a lot of controversy about softener backwash and whether it should be included, whether it should go somewhere else. I'll show some more examples of that in the questions. But if you're going to include softener backwash, then you really have to understand how your softener works, as well as optimizing your septic system so that they work in tandem and you're not overloading and causing problems. Only put wastewater in your septic system, so your garbage disposal dramatically increases in solids. So if you're putting parts of vegetables and things like that in your garbage disposal and it's going right into your septic system, bacteria can't break them down in any measurable amount of time. So what the rule of thumb is, if you have a garbage disposal, you should have the time that you have to pump your system, because it's going to fill up if you use your garbage disposal regularly. Don't use it. Additives, biological or chemical, if you're doing everything right, those are not necessary. And I know when I say that, sometimes folks email us and say, well, I've used this additive in my system and I haven't had to pump it for 20 years. And all I can tell you in those cases is I don't think they're providing any benefit. I don't know that they're actually doing any harm either, but it's a waste of money, because your system is meant to work with the natural bacteria from our bodies. And so if you're doing things the right way, it will continue to work without any kind of help, if you will. No man-made stuff, paints, pills. You have amoxicillin left over from when your kid's sick. That's an it kills bacteria. So it's not the best thing to put in your septic system where you're trying to have a healthy colony of bacteria to help break material down. And you do need to, as I mentioned before, you can use that guide for when to pump, but you should also have your tank inspected so that you can measure the solids and understand how close to being full that is. Because you may think but if you haven't been diligent about doing the maintenance on your system, and for me, if it's every 3 to 4 or 5 years, I'm going to forget 4 years from now what we did, how close it was, if it was too much, all those sorts of things. So it's best just to take care of it. I want to mention I want to talk a little bit about Septic Smart, which is a program at US EPA, and it's really grown. I know if you go back to our webinar, probably from 2016 or 2017, you'll see we have a few resources on septic systems from Septic Smart, but the program has really grown over the last few years. And so I'm going to go through a series of the type of information that's available here, even state-specific information. And so you can see now they have a Septic Smart week. I've highlighted that in yellow. It's September 16th through 20th. And so if you're a practitioner or a health department or a lab, there's materials for you here to get behind this, the week of Septic Smart, and make people more aware of the important role septic systems play in protecting water quality in wells and source water. And so this page is just epa.gov/septic, and you can get to it from here. And there's a ton of material they've developed here for well owners, or for septic system owners, and technical resources for others. So if you go to the Learn About Septic Systems page, there's an overview. You can see there's this page goes on down, but I'm going to click on Septic Smart Homeowners, and there's lots of information here about how to care for your system, additional resources, what the types of systems are, how they work. And this especially, I don't know a lot about some of the newer, more advanced treatment systems, and I know Jim is going to speak to that a little bit today, but there's just a lot of good information here. You can see on the left all the different pieces that are available. So if you click on these, it walks you through and shows you a diagram of how they can affect drinking water and how it gets down and to an aquifer depending on the geology. And so there's a lot of different examples here, and they explain each step in the process. So if I click on that, it tells you there's a diagram and a table, and then here's how your well could be affected. So having your well on the opposite side of the house is typically the way things are done. But understanding, especially the person installing your system in your well, understanding groundwater flow direction is probably a really important thing if it's known and possible in the aquifer that your well is going to be in. I would have flipped these if I were building this house and put the septic system down gradient so that, and my well up gradient on the left side, so that if there is any material from your septic system making it down into the groundwater system where your water is coming from, it's going the other direction away from your well. And again, that's where it gets back to how close are you to neighbors, what's the landscape look like, all those things. But it gives you a good idea of what's available. Advanced systems I mentioned a minute ago and what states they're approved in for different things. As I said earlier, there are a lot of new rules and it's becoming a bigger issue in a lot of areas of the country because of the contamination potential and possible damage to source water, groundwater that's being used for drinking water. So there's a lot of good information on the site. You can follow this. This is about what states have approved. And if you go down this page, it shows you a list of every state. And I've clicked on a few of these when I took the screenshot. One example here, Idaho, all the information they have on their septic page. So if you're in Idaho, my recommendation is that you talk to your state, and it's the Idaho Department of Environmental Quality. If you have any questions, they have public health districts there. They're actually very very engaged in both private well and septic issues as an agency. We have a number of folks from Idaho who've participated in different things through our class, and they put out information more than some states have the ability to do. And so they're actually a good example. And then I mentioned Massachusetts. And so there's a lot of additional rules, Chesapeake Bay issues and things that have led to Massachusetts having one of the more comprehensive sets of rules related to septic systems. And so this is the front page when you click on that list. But if you scroll down this, they talk, Title V is their compliance program, I believe. And you can look at all of these different issues related to septic and on-site systems and what's required reporting. Everyone has to be licensed. You can't do these things yourself. How they're installed is monitored, all of that stuff. So one, they're going to put in a system. They're not going to put in a system that doesn't fit the needs of that particular home. So if it's in an area where there's bedrock at the surface or there's karst or some other issue that's going to make it difficult to put in a traditional system, then they're likely going to have to put in something else. And this explains all of that. And Jim, feel free to step in if I'm butchering any of this. So this is your state, I understand. But they have a lot of cool stuff. So you click on septic system in Title V, and it takes you to first time here. If you're buying or selling a property with a septic system, what you need to know. You click on that box or go down further, and how to care for your system, how to find inspectors and soil evaluators. I know NEHA, the National Environmental Health Association, was just in Nashville last week, and we learned from several folks that are in Tennessee about what their rules are. There's a soil evaluation that has to be done by a licensed soil scientist, and their rules require that soil scientist to have 15 hours of credit in soil science, which as an ag engineer, I took soils, but I didn't have to have 15 hours, so I wouldn't even be eligible to have that job in Tennessee. So it really varies by state. You need to talk to your state about what their issues might be and what they require, especially if you're putting in a new home, and make sure you understand all the rules. Going back to the Septic Smart page, there's a lot of webcasts that have been done, or webinars like this one, although through EPA officially. And so all of those have been put online, and you can look at that list. And so like here's one on financing. And rural development has a program to help fund if you have issues with your septic system or your well. And we actually did a funding webinar in February that's on our webpage related to this. And yeah, so there's a lot of help out there if you just be a little bit inquisitive and go look. Yeah, funding, I mentioned that. Okay, sorry, excuse me. Okay. Different sources. Some of these aren't relative for a septic owner. They're more for an agency or a county or a nonprofit that might be able to use some of that funding to help others. But there's a list here on their webpage. And then there's also a new thing that's been developed since last year, the Septic Finance Learning Module. And so that's what's highlighted in yellow here. When you click on that, I actually haven't been through this, but it takes you to the Water Finance Clearinghouse, which is a website that EPA stood up that has a lot of information about the financial issues around not only septic systems, but private wells and also public water and wastewater systems. So there's a lot of information on this clearinghouse. But if you click on that link and then you see this yellow box I highlighted, the actual learning module they've developed for septic systems, if you click on that, it brings you to this page where you can see there's a set of slides with information. Chapter 3 is about financing septic systems, and you can go through that. And NAURA and SORA are also, that's the National On-Site Wastewater, I don't remember what the R is for NAURA, but NAURA and SORA are two groups of a lot of different national players, from WEF, the Water Environment Federation, and RCAP's a member, I believe, of both, or at least certainly of SORA. And there's a collaborative, wastewater collaborative that EPA has stood up that includes a lot of these organizations to help folks understand their issues. And so this has been vetted through all of them, and it's not a it's an objective type of material that you can go through. For those that are practitioners from health departments, labs, septic installers, drillers, you name it, there are materials available in Septic Smart pages related to Septic Smart Week. There's proclamations if you want to have a governor, mayor, or some leader announce it or make it a Septic Smart Week and officially designate that week in your state or your county. There's also, if you go down the page, there's a ton more resources than there were even last year. And we heard from the Septic Smart folks, Zach Lowenstein, last week about some of the things that are going on there. Wow, my bad. But there's a lot of materials that have been developed in the last year. Things for doing outreach in your county or local area, even social media, these quick tips. A lot of materials you can download. You can request high-res versions for printing posters. It's really about trying to get the message out about the importance of folks' septic systems and why they need to understand those and take care of them. And so as you go down this page, there's guides for homeowners, and you click on New Homeowners Guide for Septic Systems, and there's a page here you can use these and hand them out and provide that information. And then there's additional brochures and fact sheets. Like I said, you could spend a lot of time on this website, but there's a lot of really good, useful information. And so you need to understand your septic system is the bottom line. And this is one set of materials that'll really help you do that. Even you can get to the private drinking well page, which when you see the private well assessment and workshops tab down there, that goes back to some of the work that we do and that RCAP folks do around the country with these assessments. So there's also a lot of local information available. You should contact your local health department, co-op extension, see who your licensed septic installers and inspectors are in your area. If it's in a county, the county may have information. If it's a health district, the health district should have that information. Also, in some areas, there are programs through soil water conservation districts or other initiatives like the Chesapeake Bay. I can't remember what the name of the group is, but there's a multi-state effort to try to improve septic system performance and maintenance and just prevent nutrient problems in the Chesapeake Bay area. And it's got a huge component about proper management of septic systems. There are web resources like at NESE, I mentioned them before. The National Environmental Services Center has a septic system page with resources, just the top part of that page. There are other programs. I know there's a researcher at University of Minnesota, and her name's Sarah. I can't think of her last name, but she's working, I know just this last week we learned she's working with NAURA to develop class instruction for installers and inspectors. And also she's developed this tool that allows you to basically have a guidebook for your system. It's an owner's guide based on the type of system you have, and it's also something that your professional contractor who puts your system in can use to hand you a copy of, here's what you need to do to take care of that thing. So anyway, there's just a lot of stuff out there. A number of years ago, this is from 2014 or 2013, but the National Rural Water Association developed an app. It's actually a good tool when you first start, but once you've put the information in and you've learned about your tank and what you need to do, there's not a lot of follow-up that I know of, and maybe if someone knows that this has been updated, but it gives you a lot of, it's just a way to calculate things and understand your system, and you can set up your own pumping schedule and some of those things. It asks you a bunch of questions to try to get at where you're at in understanding your septic system. And so it's just meant to be a helpful tool. So that's what I have for septic systems. And again, we'll get to a lot more stuff in the questions, which we'll get to here in a few minutes. Before we do that, I want to talk about the private well class for a few minutes. If these webinars are not our class, a lot of people seem to think they are, but we have a 10-lesson class that's mostly about wells, 95% wells, not septic, about how to take care of your well, how to understand what type of well you have, and all those things. So you can go to privatewellclass.org and sign up for that. It asks for your first name, your email address, and what state you live in, and that's so that we can help ensure that we're reaching folks in every state. You click on Take Our Free Class or over by Learn by Email, and it takes you to a page to sign up, as I mentioned, and it sends you one lesson a week for 10 weeks. It's a PDF. It's self-paced, so you're on your own. There's nothing you have to do after that. You can do it at your leisure. For every person who says 7 days is way too slow, I want to get the material faster, we have a person who says 7 days is way too fast, I need you to slow this down. So we think it's about right. One a week gives you time to read through it. It's 6 to 10 pages of material, and again, it's all self-paced, but if you go through the whole thing, it really helps you understand information about your well type, your geology, things that are common sense and you shouldn't do and should do, common issues you might have. Why is my pump cycling on and off when it really shouldn't be? How to find help locally, all those sorts of things. Along with each lesson, like the first lesson is called The Science of Groundwater, there's also a resource library page for that. And you can see here there's 8 or 10 resources that are related to that topic. So if the information in the lesson we provided isn't clear, you can go to these other resources and read more. And that's probably what most people tell us they do, is they start looking at some of these other resources to get a better handle and understanding on those topics. And there's one for each of the 10 lessons. I've just highlighted 2 of them here, but they're all free and publicly available documents that are mostly through extension or universities or a state agency. And so they're all very helpful, and they're free to access. We do webinars like today every month, and some of those are specific, like we do one a year on septic systems. We do one every other year now on lead. We've done these for realtors and for labs and for sanitarians. You can see over here on the side, and mostly for well owners. And so you can go back and look at any of the past ones. As I mentioned, if you go back to this one from July 17th last year, this initial material that I just covered, it has been updated, but it's very similar. But what's not the same are the questions that we're going to get to here in a little bit, because every time those are based on the questions you all ask, and we try to answer different questions where it's appropriate, or make sure we're covering the basic questions that we get the most of. There's some questions we get 20 of every time, and we feel like it's worth covering that every time. Because of that, there are different people on, but for you as if you're trying to learn more about your system, what I would recommend is go back to the July, the 2018 septic webinar, and go skip through to the questions, which start about halfway through, and you can learn more about what than you're going to get today, because they're questions we answered last time. We also have support pages, like for our lead webinar, we stood up this lead page. It's just privateoilclass.org/lead, and it gives you access to other information that's out there related to lead in your drinking water. And it's mostly a premise plumbing problem, and so it just kind of walks you through what you need to understand about what types of pipe you have, your drinking water quality, if it's aggressive or corrosive water, and how to figure those things out. And also water filters, some information about where to find the right information. So if you buy especially a filter for lead for your kitchen tap, that you get one that's certified to actually remove lead, and you can get that, you can see here from different groups. We put out a series right now. There's 19 short videos. They're 4 to 6 minutes long. What is a sand and gravel aquifer? What do I do during a drought? What do I do after a fire or a flood? How does my private well pressure tank work? So this is the most popular video we have. It's had over 275,000 views since 2016, and that tells us that a lot of people have pressure problems with their private water system, and also that there's not a lot of good information out there to explain how your pressure tank works. And so this is a really simple diagram that talks about the 3 types of tanks. Most of them now are using a bladder or diaphragm. The old tanks are the ones on the left, for instance, and it just walks through how they work, how to know when maybe there's a problem, and what to do if you need to increase pressure, for instance, and what to look for. So they're meant to be helpful. They're on one topic only, and again, they're all 4 to 6 minutes long in that range. Things like what I should know about a shared private well. In Washington State, if you have 2 homes on one well, it's considered a special class of public water supply, where in most states it's 15 homes or 25 people to be considered a public water supply. So understanding the rules, why you need to have an agreement between all the people on the same well, even that well is probably on one person's property, all those sorts of things that can eventually lead to either a lawsuit or not access to your water anymore. It's really a much more common problem than many people realize. And so we created a video to kind of explain the landscape and what you need to do to protect yourself, especially if you are on a shared well and it's not on your property. You need to have something in writing. We have podcasts of the first 3 lessons, and then the other 4, 5, and 6 on this list are interviews we did with RFD radio in Illinois through the Farm Bureau, and we hope to at some point finish the rest of those. It's tricky, when you can use diagrams and visuals to show how some of these concepts work. It's much easier than trying to do it as a podcast. And so anyway, they're really useful. We've had, I think, close to 3,000 downloads of our podcasts, which is awesome. And if you're into that, you can download those on our website as well. And we've developed a version of our class and some of those short videos in Spanish. And so if you're serving a Spanish population, you can take the entire class in Spanish, which is awesome in those areas where it's very, very common language, and there's a lot of well owners who speak native Spanish. So the goal of our program really is to give well owners information, advice, so they understand that their well is important. They really need to know how it works so that they can protect themselves and their family from risk. And that's the overall point of our program, as well as protecting the source water that you're all drinking. Once an aquifer gets contaminated, it's much harder to clean it than it is to protect it in the first place. And so the more you all know about how to do that is a benefit to all of us. and anyone who may be in your area. So we received over 100 questions in advance today. And so we went through those and we've picked a number of those out, and we're going to answer some of those today, but obviously we can't answer them all. We'd be here quite a long time. If you ask a specific question, especially about your state or your rules, we ask that you send us an email and we can look into it, but it's not something we can answer on this webinar. And so we can certainly help you though. That's what we're here for. And if you want to ask a question today, I want to remind you that you can put it in the question box on your GoToWebinar panel. And Katie's keeping track of those, and it looks like we have a number already. Yeah, it looks like we have 5 or 6 questions already, maybe. So, and again, thanks to Jim Starbird, who's going to do most of the rest of the talking, hopefully, for helping us out today as a registered sanitarian and someone who's seen the good and the bad on the septic side in his job. He's got a lot of good advice to share with us. So let me go back to that. First thing though I want to address is about additives, yeast, commercial chemicals. We did a blog post on this after our first septic webinar a number of years ago. And should I use any additives in my septic system? Really, the answer is no. And you can go to our blog page and find this, and you can see the resources we used and the work that's been done to show that if you maintain your system, you don't put things in it that don't belong, and you're not overflowing it, you know, really additives don't provide any benefit. And so it's really a waste of money. And I won't say that they do harm. Several people ask, do additives cause harm? Jim, I don't know if you have any thoughts there, but I don't think they're really harmful necessarily. I've not run into.
I've never heard of any harm.
Yeah. So. Okay, yeah, and so this is from Nessie's webpage. They actually did some work looking at this, as well as compiled research that others had done. And again, the bottom line is there's no evidence that shows they provide any benefit if you're maintaining your system like you should. And so the other thing I wanted to address is about softener backwash. This is from Rhode Island, and basically they have a sentence here that says, however, the department does not recommend this practice, which is discharging water softener backwash brine into an on-site wastewater treatment system. But they require or recommend a dry well. However, there's rules on that too. They have to be so far away from a public well. And what I wanted to point out is there's a lot of conflicting information here, and there has been research done over the years that really shows that softener backwash isn't necessarily harmful. And we just held a private well conference in May. We had about 120 people there. We had 2.5 days of presentations, and one of those was from Eric Yagi from the Water Quality Association. And I asked him to speak specifically about softeners in septic systems, because there's been some newer research. I know he highlighted Virginia Tech research that was done in 2013 that really shows that if you're taking care of your softener and optimizing how it works and optimizing and taking care of your septic system the way you're supposed to, there's really, in some cases, depending on the amount, I believe is the amount of sodium that's being put in the system, it can actually help benefit dropping those solids out so that your water's clear going out into your discharge field, your drain field. And so, you know, it really takes someone who understands those things. So you'd want to use a treatment specialist or your septic specialist who understands those things to help get your system in line that way. Some of the old softeners that, you know, regenerate on a set schedule maybe too often, or you have it set to do it way more than it needs to, then you might want to consider changing those things. And I don't know, Jim, if you have any expertise here, but from Eric's talk, it seemed like that it's, you know, if done properly, that it really is okay to do. And yeah, so I don't know if you have any.
My recommendation is, if you are going to do that, check with your local state laws. I know here in Massachusetts, any backwash connected to a septic system is an automatic failure under the Title V inspection rules. Other than I believe they just allowed like a reverse osmosis sink, like under point of use sink underneath your kitchen, which but anything like a softener backwash all has to go into a dry well here in Massachusetts by law.
Okay, great. Because that's, yeah, saying it is different everywhere. And again, Massachusetts has some pretty comprehensive rules. So, so yeah, good advice. So one of the questions was about how often should I pump my 1,000-gallon tank with 2 people? I just want to remind everybody that, because this is one of the big deals, some people have never pumped their tank. Some people don't even know where their tank is. And that's a critical, basic thing that you need to understand. And so I threw this back up just because I want to reiterate that it really does matter how many people you have and whether you're using a garbage disposal. And here in this particular one from Nessie, it says, if a garbage disposal is in use, pumping frequency may need to be increased. And so it's one of the main takeaways here is the best way to preserve your system and ensure that those solids aren't going to clog your drain field and cause a problem because your tank gets full is to make sure you pump it enough. And you can have a septic professional come out and measure the amount of solids in your tank. And now, is there a recommendation, Jim, on what level the solids should be at before it should be pumped? I mean, you don't need to do it when it's only 30% full, but you want to at 70 or 60. Is there
yeah, between 50 and 70 is kind of the guidance I've been seeing a lot. That's with your scum layer and your sludge layer. So basically, how much you have floating on top and how much is settled at the bottom. So when you're about 50 to 70% volume, that's probably when you want to pump.
Oh, thank you. Okay, so the rest of these are slides just like this one, and they're all for Jim to answer. So hopefully he's ready, and I'll just read the questions, and Jim, you're free to share what you know. So what's the life expectancy of a septic system?
Well, a lot of organizations will put it at 20 to 30 years, but I've seen many, systems that last a lot longer than that. I still see cesspools here in New England that are still working as designed, if you wouldn't say they're treating the water as we'd like, but they're still working as they were designed to do way back when. So really, I think the septic life expectancy really comes down to 2 big things: how it's installed and how it's maintained, really. So, here in Massachusetts, we install septic systems a minimum of 4 feet above the highest groundwater table ever. And we do soil evaluations to make sure the soil that the water is going into is appropriate. So, between those 2 and proper maintenance, I would imagine it would last longer than 20 to 30 years. But, as a general rule, I would say every 20 to 30 years. But with maintenance, I'd say it could outlive most people.
And just, a lot of folks aren't familiar with cesspools. Can you explain what they are?
A cesspool is basically, it's almost reminiscent of a dug well, if you've ever seen that. Most of them here in New England are made out of field stones. Basically, a hole in the ground could go down to 6, 8 feet, probably about 4 feet in diameter circle. And basically, it's just a pipe piped into it from the house, and that's basically the septic tank / discharge all goes in that one spot. Now, I've seen other ones that they put another cesspool right in front of that other one and run a pipe from one to the other as the first cesspool becomes full, if you will. So that was an old way of doing things, but sometimes I've seen them actually still working. There's a lot of local ordinances making them automatic failures, regardless if they're working as designed. But either way, they're still not treating the water as we'd like to with our current technology.
Sure. Thank you. So how do I locate my septic system? It's possible my 136-year-old home only has a septic field. And I didn't add in here, these folks have lived there, they said, for 36 years, and they've had a couple people come out and try to find the septic tank.
First comes to mind, this might be a cesspool right here. The 136-year-old home, that's kind of the technology they're using back then. So to find it, I would suggest that they kind of find where the sewer pipe goes out of their foundation. And if they can get a not too long, but 3 or 4 foot metal probe, if you will, that can take, but it's very thin. That can take a little, can get through the ground kind of easy. You can kind of probe lightly, following that pipe out, and hopefully you hit a cover, if you will. Being a cesspool, I would worry about the structurality of that cover too, so I'd watch out for safety. But I've never seen a septic field being fed by just a straight pipe from the house. I've always seen it with a septic tank, but it's very common that it goes right into a cesspool. So that would be my hunch, but I've only worked in New England, so I don't know what's in the rest of the country.
That makes a lot of sense, actually. Okay, so is it bad for a septic system to be idle for extended periods of time?
Yes. Septic systems are basically a living organism. We've talked about bacteria. You want to continuously give them food, which is our waste, if you will. And also, especially if you live in a northern climate, during the wintertime, every time you are flushing water down there, you're actually putting some heat in there, as well as the biological activity that creates the heat as well. So you can imagine if you have say you have a summer home that no one's using in a northern climate, A, it's not getting fed, so it's not going to have the biological activity for the heat, and B, it's not getting any warm water for the home. So the biological activity might be slim to none. You might be starting fresh every late spring when you go open up the summer home. So the best course of action is a constant flow going into the septic system. So it's I wouldn't call it bad, but it's not good for the biologics of the system.
So a lot of seasonal systems would really have a problem with that. I mean,
I'm sorry, what'd you say?
So a lot of seasonal homes like that are probably doing that. I mean, that's just normal operation then.
Yeah. Yes, and also with seasonal homes, you might have the whole family up, and that a home that was built for maybe 6 people now has 12 people in it, in a system that doesn't really have the biologics going. So it kind of makes it even worse, because you have a big 4th of July party and you really only been in that house maybe a month, since you closed it down that fall. So the system really isn't roaring like you want it to, and then you put in that kind of flow and waste into it. It's kind of a recipe for disaster.
Okay. Could you provide information about gray water systems? This is pretty generic, but just maybe a quick explanation of what they are and how they're used.
Okay. Not the biggest thing here in New England. We're thankfully have quite a lot of water, so gray water is not the biggest. We don't need to do as much water conservation as other parts of the country. But for what I've seen, gray water really is the basically your sink water. Basically, will go into a holding tank and be used to flush toilets. I've also I've seen it used for irrigation. I've never seen it for edible plants, but more lawns and flowers, if you will. But like I said, I don't have the largest experience with it, because we don't have the need for as much water conservation as like Arizona would, if you will.
Sure, no, and that's exactly right. I mean, a lot of places really don't have a need for a gray water system, but it usually is a water conservation practice, typically. My septic system is over 50 years old, but functioning okay. Is there anything I should consider updating or improving?
No, I wouldn't, if it isn't broke, I wouldn't fix it. I would just keep maintaining it, as well as you can. Pump it as, you know, at a good pace. I don't know how many people are in the home, etc. But you can always ask when the septic pumper comes. Say you're on a 2-year rotation, he comes in and goes, you really don't need it. Well, maybe you can bump it up to 3 or 4 based on, your actual use, as long as nothing's ever changed in the house as far as number of people there or any use you're doing there. But so I would just say keep maintaining it, and just don't flush bad things down there, and it'll treat you right for hopefully another 50 years.
How do I know when to have my septic tank pumped if I don't want to rely on a guide? I think we've answered that, but
Yeah, I'd say I would go on the proofs in the pudding. When's the last time you had it pumped, and what did the pumper say when he was there? Could he say could he have waited a couple more years? Well, now if you were on 2 years, now you can just move it up to 4 years and check it like that, without going by a guide. Or you could go by the bedroom rule. Most systems are made for two. Every bedroom has 2 people, and if there's 3-bedroom house, only 2 people live in there. You can kind of move it out to 5-6 years as opposed to every 2 years. So. But it's like I said, really, I think the best part is if you have a reliable pumper and someone you can trust, and when you're on site, just say, is it necessary? Could I wait another year or two? And kind of the proof's in the pudding. I think it's probably your best bet.
Great. Okay, so when you have your septic tank pumped, do you need to add liquid or anything else back in? And they're not talking about additives. This was asked 2 or 3 times. Just do you need to prime the system, so to speak, with water or anything else?
No. I would say just leave it as is. Most systems are based on to really have the tanks hold for about 3 days flow. At least they are here in Massachusetts. So if you're expected to have 330 gallons a day of flow coming out of the house, we make you have a 1,000-gallon tank. So 3-4 days after you pump, you should be full again and everything flowing as normal. I would say as a caveat, like here in Massachusetts, we have Title V inspections, and you cannot do an inspection until 14 days after pumping has occurred. So they want to see the system in motion, if you will. So.
The wipes that say, quote, flushable, are they really okay to flush?
No, not at all. This goes for if you're on a city source system or an on-site system. They just don't break down. I've seen many pumpings. My company also manages a number of elderly communities for US HUD, and the biggest thing we're pumping out of our septic tanks twice a year is these flushable wipes.
Huh.
I apologize. We're getting a little weather here in Massachusetts. You might have just heard a big thunder.
Yeah. Sound like a chair, rattling. Okay, so could you talk about aeration systems and advanced treatment systems? What are the installation costs and potential problems, especially where there is a shallow bedrock? And that was a separate question. I kind of combined them, where it's a sensitive area basically, and so it's probably required. But yeah, just enlighten us a little bit about what these advanced treatment systems are and how they work.
Okay, I'm going to talk in real generalities because a lot of these systems are proprietary, if you will. There's a lot of different companies out there that have different systems. There's different state approvals in each state, I would imagine. I know in Massachusetts there is, in Rhode Island, for these systems. So I can't really talk each system, but a lot of these are used to denitrification. Now, installation costs, potential problems. Well, installation, you're talking more pieces than a normal gravity-fed system, if you will. You're talking more pumps. There's usually extra septic tanks for settling, extra tanks for an aeration, if you will. I've seen ones that have blowers. I've seen ones that actually require you to have almost like a shed for the controls. So installation is going to be higher up there. A lot of these settling tanks too, you got the shallow bedrock. Do you have the area before that bedrock to even put these settling tanks in, or these treatment tanks? Which technology are you using? Some technologies will give you a smaller leach field. Some technologies will give you less depth of groundwater. So there's a lot of different things to consider with each technology. And cost is, there's more to install. There's usually electricity for other things that brings up the cost, but also the long-term cost of the electricity to run that system, whether it be an aerator or a blower. The service contracts, usually you need to have a service contract with a proprietary company to go make sure it's working. And there's more parts that can break too if so there's quite a lot to do. There's quite a lot in that could bring up costs and problems, etc. Talking in generalities.
Oh no, that's great. And so some of these are basically like a community wastewater treatment system, right? I mean, they separate everything out. It has to be taken. It doesn't. None of it goes in the ground, right? Or just clean water doesn't.
No, it goes. No, with these systems, what they'll do is give further treatment before it goes into the ground. So we call them a lot here in Massachusetts package plants. It's basically a wastewater treatment plant in a package, if you will. And we'll put a lot of these in areas that have too close to public water or nitrogen sensitive areas, zone 2s of a public water system. That's where we see a lot of these being used. And now it's starting to use some of these technologies to get phosphorus out too, especially in like shellfish bed communities, stuff like that.
Okay, great. So the technologies are advancing, and we're going to see more and more of these, I assume.
Yes, I would say. I would definitely, if you're thinking on any of these, is look at your local and state regulations. Like I said, Massachusetts, these technologies have to have different approvals and to be installed, and certain people should install them, and they have to be maintained certain ways. So, before you install one of these, I definitely look into the short and long-term costs and what you're getting yourself into. Some of these actually require a grade 5 wastewater operator to come by and check on it like once every 3 months. So,
wow.
which can get costly.
Sure.
It's usually not in a single family home, but we put one of these. I think it was 36 single units, and it was a public water well too close to where the septic system was, and they made them put one of these systems in to further treat the water to get nitrates taken care of out of the well. It worked, but it was a $250,000 investment by the community. So.
Wow. Yeah. Well, and we learned last week there are a lot more of these quote cluster decentralized systems going in, and I assume those are kind of what some of these would be.
Big time, yeah. We're seeing a lot in Massachusetts as the centralized wastewater systems have, they're getting older. They need a lot of rehab, and it's just the requirements too are just very, very costly. That they're finding that the on-site is really definitely a part of our wastewater infrastructure that really needs to be explored financially to maintain the environment at the same time economically, if you will.
Interesting. All right, thanks. Okay, so is it possible to install your septic system or some of the installation yourself to bring the cost down?
I would only recommend this if you are very handy with an excavator. And know elevations and and all the like, and know how to move septic tanks around and know the proper soils and the gravel bases, and it's very advanced, and if it's even legal in your state to do yourself. I know in Massachusetts you need to have an installer's permit from the local board of health to put a system in, and some boards of health require you to be a licensed installer. So it's up to the regulations, but it's and like I said, if you're not very handy with an excavator, I wouldn't go rent one at the local rental center and try to put your own septic system in. I don't think it would work out for you in the long run.
Well, yeah, and I know like even in Illinois, I think you have to be licensed for septic, but you're allowed as a homeowner, a landowner, to put in your own well if you have the capability. And that's certainly also not recommended. So it makes sense. So what should be planted on top of the drain field and how to deal with roots? I just combined a number of questions about both of those things.
Yeah.
Well,
I would second what you said during your presentation. I wouldn't put anything on it but grass, and use it for passive recreation. If you want to throw the baseball around on top of it or something like that, but I wouldn't park a car on it or anything like that. How would I deal with roots? Two ways. I mean, if the roots are not causing a backup right now, you could just get rid of the tree, and sooner or later those roots will disintegrate next year or two and break down just like any other natural being, if you will. But if the roots are impacted, you probably should kind of snake it out through hope you have a distribution box, and usually get a snake down one of those, and then with a grinder and kind of grind the roots out if it's a big deal, it's blocking things. But I would get rid of the tree that's causing the roots either way, because even if you get rid of the roots this time, they're just going to grow right back in. It's a perforated pipe, so it's not like they can't get in. So
yeah, no, that's a big issue for sure. Could you talk about the leach field and lateral lines, why they have to be replaced, effects from flooding? We had a number of questions about the leach field, and a couple of folks were just interested in understanding more about that. And I know I covered the basics a little bit, but what have you seen related to problems with these? And we just talked about not putting trees or asphalt or anything on top of them, but what else? What have you seen, I guess?
Yeah, the two things I usually see leach fields failing from is either the biomat or some sort of grease has got into the septic, the leach field, and basically it's clogged the surface that the water can no longer go into the ground like it's supposed to. So it's either it bubbles up to the surface, or if the system was just installed in a high groundwater area, that the natural groundwater goes up too high to have enough clean area before the groundwater table in the septic system. Like I mentioned before, in Massachusetts, we have a minimum of 4 feet we make sure that the soils underneath are adequate for treatment. So you have 4 feet of clean soil before the highest groundwater table ever, because we actually dig down what's called a deep hole test and find out there's different redoxmorphic features in the soil that we can find when the highest groundwater table is ever. From there we go 4 feet above that, which could include a mound, mounding up above the grade of the surface to give you the clearance. So if those two are taken care of and it's not flooded, if it's a flooded system from a 100-year storm and it's never happened before, and it'll probably be another 100 years before it happens again, then I would try to let it dry out. If it's a place that floods every spring because you're next to the river, then it's time to move the system. That'd kind of be my advice as far as flooding. But I wouldn't touch that leach field until it needed to be replaced. I mean, the PVC shouldn't rot out that's in the ground. Some people still have clay piping that might break, that maybe they need to put new lines in, something like that. But I'd keep the lines as is unless there's a problem. I think I touched upon all those.
Yeah, yeah, you have. Yeah, oh, definitely. Thank you. I think so. We do have a number of questions. I think, yeah, that is our canned questions, if you will. That went a little faster than I expected, which is good. But we do have a number of questions from folks, and so Katie's put those in a Google Doc that we're sharing, and I'm going to pull that over. If everyone will hang on a second and make that full screen. Um, and is that, Jim, is that clear enough to read, or should I make it bigger?
No, I can see it.
Okay. Okay, so how far away should a septic tank be from a well? Boy, that's a loaded question. Um, you want to go first, or you want me to?
I can go first. In Massachusetts, the septic tank has to be a minimum 50 feet away. The leach field has to be a minimum of 100 feet away. So I've seen other states, no, it's about 50 usually of the septic tank, but the leach field, I've seen states with the leach field go down to 75, but that's basically usually the setbacks for private well in around here.
Yeah, and to add to that, I mean, in general, that should protect, but there are cases where that doesn't. And where we end up finding those cases are where a well may be contaminated with coliform E. coli. And so then it's been disinfected, shot chlorinated, and it keeps coming back. And in one case in particular, I'll mention, it was a dug in a bored well. So it's a large diameter, 3-foot diameter well that you had concrete tile for the casing, and they're 4-foot sections. And the water seeps in between those sections where they seep together. And what it ended up being is it was an area where the reason you have a large diameter well is because you don't have an aquifer in the first place. So it was all clay, and this well tapped about a 2-inch thick lens of sand that went out laterally away from the well. Everything else was tight clay where water really won't move through it. But because there's only one little thin 2-inch stringer of sand, if you will, that where most of the water is moving, it eventually drew that in, and it ended up connecting to the well. And I know it was more than 75 feet away, which I believe it is in Illinois. And the other case is sometimes, well, yeah. So it should be protective, and it will be most of the time, but it's still not something to rule out if you keep having bacteria problems that come back. It would be my advice there. But that's usually a case-by-case basis. So, okay, number 2, what happens if old prescriptions are flushed down the toilet? Well, it's, I'm assuming it's just not it's a best practice not to do that, but it doesn't necessarily mean that your system's going to fail or any of those things, right?
Well, it depends on the prescription. If it's a, like you mentioned before, amoxicillin, well, that could be a problem. It could whack out all the bacteria in the septic tank. But even other prescriptions, they're finding that it just doesn't break down in our septic systems naturally, and then goes back into the water. So our groundwater systems, whether you have a private well or even public water systems that get their town water from groundwater. So the pharmaceuticals, we can find different percentages of them from they've done studies on like city wastewater that gets discharged into water, a fresh water source after it's been treated at the wastewater treatment plant. They're finding that even after all that treatment, the prescriptions are still there. So if you're on a private well and you put it into your septic system, sooner or later, those prescriptions are going to build up in the environment and and find their way back into the drinking water source. So ideally, I think prescriptions should be a lot of local health departments and police departments are taking them in now and doing drug take back days, etc. So I would or even like their own pharmacies are taking back as well. So I would dispose of them properly and not put them down the toilet, ideally.
Yeah, I was just in a pharmacy in Champaign last week that had a place by the pharmacy part of the, well, you know, they do a lot more than pharmaceuticals, but that had a box where you could drop off old prescriptions. So it's becoming more common to have those places, and that's definitely the best thing to do, no doubt. Okay, is there anything that can go into the garbage disposal or just don't use at all?
My suggestion would be not to use it at all. You know, it's just much more organic matter putting into the system, much more for the system to break down, much more for you to pump out. Just an example here in Massachusetts, if you want to have a garbage disposal in your house, you have to double your septic tank size. So if you were going to have a 3-bedroom house and you normally going to have a 1,000-gallon tank, you want to put that garbage disposal on your sink, now need a 2,000-gallon tank. So just to show you how much matter can go down from a garbage disposal.
Yeah, we had a question in the before questions that was a single person on a home that was designed for 3 bedrooms, and you know, can I still use my garbage disposal? And so I guess I didn't include that. I meant to, but it's so in the end, it's not that it is going to cause your system to fail. It just means it's going to be more expensive. If you have to design it larger, or 2, you're going to really need to watch how quickly it fills up your tank. Or does it?
Yeah, I mean,
is there more to it? Like the bacteria and stuff, does it affect them differently, or do you know?
It's just basically just putting so much organic matter down there that it just takes so much longer for it to break down than just you know, human waste and toilet paper, if you will. You know, next thing you know, you're putting down all your vegetable matter, and you can imagine you're probably tripling. You could try triple or quadruple your the carbon you're putting into the system, if you will. We have a lot of commercial facilities that are on site. We'll put in grease traps and other further treatment, like a Dunkin' Donuts puts just the coffee getting put down the system into the septic system, you know, needs extra treatment because of all the biologics. So, you know, being a conventional home system without any, you know, further treatment, further filters or anything, it's just not a good use. I mean, if you monitor it, I guess, you know, it's not a big, you know, you can maintain it, but, you know, it's a compost pile or your city trash probably be a much, advantageous for the length of your septic system's life, if you will.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so number 4 here. I live in a community of about 400 septic tanks and private wells. Some people like and want to keep their autonomy with private systems. Some want a public wastewater system. Based on your nationwide perspective, what are your thoughts? So, you know, one question I have is how deep are the wells? How susceptible is the aquifer to, you know, the water table? Some of those things. But I don't have the perspective you do. So.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's being so general. You know, how big are the, you know, is this a community of 400 1-acre lots, or you know, there's 400 third of an acre lots that, you know, so it's being very general. I don't know how much land they have there. I will say in general that on, you know, having some sort of way to monitor your wastewater, on-site wastewater systems and make sure they're functioning properly is quite a lot cheaper than a wastewater system, centralized, you know, piping in. You know, it's about $1 million a mile just to run the pipe, never mind get into the treatment system itself and, you know, meet the EPA guidelines, your state guidelines, the operations, the energy, everything else. So unless there's a serious environmental or public health issue, I would say stay with the septic waste, the septic system scenario you have. Just find a way to regulate it, if you will. Kind of like here in Massachusetts, we have the Title V program. The local boards of health have the authority to enforce a failing septic system. A lot of the failing septic systems are found during real estate transfers under the Title V program because you need to have a Title V inspection in order to transfer your property, or the new owner takes responsibility to have it done within a year and then fix the system, etc. So if you can get, financially wise, it's a lot cheaper for them to maintain what you have. But, some situations, it's a public or environmental health issue that, a centralized system kind of is the only way, or even like a shared septic system kind of is the only way. So it's case by case with the generalization of this question, if you will.
And I would say, in my perspective, is the septic tank is the source of potential contamination, and so to me, if you have an aquifer and people already have private wells and they're not talking about putting in a public drinking water system, it's better to me to move all that source off-site away from the wells. Again, depending on how much potential influence they would have on the wells. You do see communities with a central wastewater system and private wells, but not very often. Usually it's the other way. You see a public drinking water system with septic tanks a lot more often. At least I have. So
yeah, and in general, a new drinking water system is much cheaper than a new wastewater system to install and maintain. It's just wastewater is just a much more expensive in general. That's with who knows what's in your groundwater where you are and what you might need to treat. If you found PFAS in the ground, well, things might be different. But in general, though, drinking water, it's much smaller pipe. It's smaller pumps, and if it's a groundwater system, usually the water's pretty clean, so there's not much treatment required. So
I did not know that. That's good to know. Thank you. Okay, so does the use of, I don't even know what these are, macerator toilets endanger the system?
I've never heard of that.
I don't know. I can look it up. Or Katie, if you could look it up and give us a definition, that'd be great. I'm going to move on. What is the life of the, okay, here we go. Send waste to a macerating unit located behind the toilet or in the wall. High-powered blades liquefy the waste, which is then pumped out of the unit through normal pipe that has been tied to the main drain line. So it's already been, so there's no real solids per se. It's been made into a puree, if you will.
Yeah, I would, I can't say how much experience. I would imagine being, broken down makes it easier for the biologics to do their thing and break it down further. But at the same time, does it still separate out in the sludge and scum? Or is it, kind of made into a smoothie, if you will? So I don't know.
I would think it's going to eventually start collating back together again. So it's a matter of
would it have enough time though in the tank? I don't know. It's a new one on me.
Yeah, it seems like a good way.
I've heard of grinder pumps on the outside of a home before going to a wastewater system, but never a toilet like this. So
interesting. All right, so I guess we don't. Yeah, so we don't have an answer, but it'd be interesting to read more about that. So what is the life of the plastic tank and pipe material of the new systems? When does the tank need replacement? How do you tell if it's cracked or defective due to age?
The plastic systems, I would imagine it lasts 100 years. Plastics I think they're supposed to outlive the earth. So, I'd be I wouldn't be worried about the plastics per se. I'd be more the seams, the glues, if there's any gaskets where the pipe comes out, that kind of things. I will say a plastic septic tank is it's a lot more delicate than a concrete one. So, if you, like I mentioned before, doing the probe for it, you got to be a lot more cautious when you're probing for a plastic tank as opposed to a cement one, because your probe could go right through it. As far as knowing when there's a crack without digging it up, if there's a crack and water's getting in there or water's getting out, when you look at the tank, it should be at operating level, which, it's about halfway of the outlet water coming out of the tank, flowing out, leaving a little under half. So if you're, over that, there's something going on, there's more water going in, the system can't get it out. So usually something wrong with your leach field. But if it's under that operating level, that means you're leaking. So, without digging up the whole tank and knowing that there's a hole, I'd really be looking at the operating level of the septic tank, and is it at the normal levels where it should be flowing out.
All right. That makes perfect sense. Okay. Number 8, would the seasonal systems be one where additives may help? I don't know if about additives if they seed the bacteria.
Yeah. It's possible. I mean, it really is. It's possible. Because the biological activity was down and or if non-existent, and then you put some in there to jumpstart it. It's possible. I can't say it wouldn't. I can't say it would. So
it sounds like a good research topic for someone, is what it sounds like.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense to me that would kickstart it. So.
Okay. What does cooking oil or animal fat do to a sewer or septic system?
It clogs it.
Yeah.
Any kind of animal fat, butter, anything like that, if you can put that into an old spaghetti jar or something like that, cap it and put it in with your trash, it's just a much better thing to do than put it down your drain and into your septic system.
Yeah, there's even a term in the wastewater industry for that. It's called FOG, fats, oils, and grease. And they're the biggest problem we have. If you've ever seen a giant basketball-sized grease ball in a wastewater plant, they get in the way.
They do. It's the centralized systems is, and especially in like a restaurant or a place like that, there's such a emphasis on making sure they have internal and external grease traps before it even gets to the city sewer system, and they're maintained too. So it's definitely, it's right up there with the wipes. It's the wipes are kind of the new issue, but fats, oils, and greases have always been the big problem with wastewater systems.
Okay. Oh, wow. Is RV antifreeze okay to use to winterize a home with a septic system? I'm assuming that means restaurant grade, right?
I don't know.
Because I know I know in Canada where they had a couple of years ago, I got a call from someone, and even the health department recommended food grade antifreeze, if you will. It wasn't harmful. They poured it in a well so that the well everything wouldn't freeze up because it was so cold. And so I think that's an emergency thing to do though. And assuming an RV means that it's, if it means RV, really? I mean, our RV antifreeze should be the same as, no, it's not recreational vehicle. I mean, if it's a car, then that antifreeze, it's poisonous.
Yeah, I would, I have a summer RV trailer, and we have it winterized every year by an RV guy, and I know we rinse our pipes out for a good half hour, 45 minutes when we come on, make sure there's no pink in the lines. As far as what it does to a septic system, I wouldn't I wouldn't say it probably does good things, but I can't say that it does a bad thing either. And at the same time, what would you do? You know, kind of run a hose from your hose bib or something to get it out of the house? And is it good to put in the environment? So it's kind of a catch-22. Really, I don't want to give a mis-answer.
Yeah, I don't think we can try to figure out if there is a better approach. Because yeah, it shouldn't go through a septic system, I would think. But again,
Yeah, I mean,
that's just what I'm assuming would be kind of common sense. But I don't. But there are, there are grades of antifreeze that aren't harmful. They break down, they're natural. And I would think you'd want to use something like that. But I'd have to look into it more. So, all right. Well, that's the last question, and we're past our time. So, first of all, Jim, thanks very much for attending today and providing your insights. It's great to have someone with real experience on this, because I certainly don't, and it's always interesting, both the questions we get and the realities of having a septic system. So I really appreciate your time. And Katie, thanks for tracking everything today. And all of you who are still on, you can see the email is info@privatewellclass.org. If you need anything from us, please email us. And as it says here, maybe it doesn't say here, but this webinar was recorded today, and it will be on our website within probably a week. And so you can let others know. We know a number of people ask about not being able to attend today who'd signed up, and it'll be available on our website or on our YouTube channel. And again, it's all free and available. So thanks for attending. Jim, thanks again. And